Everybody, pleasure to be here and with the distinguished members of the panel. Canada is really very pleased to co-sponsor this event alongside of all the other high-level experts on the panel today, as well as Belgium, my colleague from Belgium, I see it at the end of the table, and the other co-sponsors. And this comes amid deepening concerns over the use of arbitrary detention to silence journalists, as you well know. Canada is deeply concerned by the continued targeting of journalists, media workers, and defenders of freedom of opinion and expression. Around the world, they are being silenced and attacked. They are subjected to physical violence, arbitrary detention, and disappearance simply for carrying out their work. Transnational repression further places them and their loved ones at risk. Such tactics are often deliberate attempts to silence independent voices, quell calls for accountability, and to create a chilling effect on freedom of expression. Journalists and media workers facing surveillance intimidation has become commonplace in many parts of the world. Concerns over the misuse of national security or foreign agent laws as a tool to repress and arbitrarily detain people for exercising their rights and freedoms has a negative impact on victims, independent human rights reporting, and contributes to censorship. Canada urges the release of journalists and activists who have been arbitrarily detained and for states to repeal measures that restrict independent reporting. Canada is closely monitoring the situation of journalists and media freedom globally. In different regions around the world, journalists have been targeted simply for exercising their human rights and bringing attention to key issues. In Hong Kong, pro-democracy activists and journalists such as Jimmy Lai continue to face prosecution under the Beijing-imposed national security law. Mr. Lai's ongoing detention is a violation of Hong Kong's international human rights obligations, including freedom of speech, of the press, and of association. In Gaza, journalists and media workers play a crucial role in exposing the devastating reality of war. We condemn all violence against media and call for their protection and safe access. In Belarus, 33 journalists remain behind bars for fulfilling their professional duty, and while many more have been forced into exile. We understand that this environment will be explored in greater detail by our panelists. And as you may know, Canada since 2021, together with our partners, has been at the forefront efforts to deter arbitrary detention in state-to-state relations. In 2024, the Independent International Security Panel on Arbitrary Detention in State-to-State Relations was established to conduct a rigorous examination of this issue through the lens of international law. The panel's report will present its legal analysis, findings, and recommendations for states to act through international law. We look forward to its official launch this October, next month. Our work on this issue is closely linked to broader efforts to protect journalists and human rights defenders, particularly those at risk of arbitrary detention. Canada will continue to mobilize international support to end this practice and stand with those arbitrarily detained. Canada stands with journalists, media workers, and human rights defenders worldwide, including through initiatives like the Media Freedom Coalition and the Independent International Panel on Arbitrary Detention. We remain deeply committed to ensuring that journalists can operate freely and safely without fear of reprisal. I thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Ambassador McCullagh, thank you very much indeed, and our sincere thanks to both Canada and Belgium, as well as our friends at Article 19, at Reporters Without Borders, and our friends at the Raoul Wallenberg Center for supporting this session. Excellencies, distinguished guests, I'm Jan Yeginsu. I'm an international lawyer practicing as a barrister at 3 Verulam buildings. But more relevantly, I serve as one of the 2 deputy chairs of the high-level panel of legal experts on media freedom. The high-level panel is the independent advisory arm to the Media Freedom Coalition of States, today co-chaired, I should say, by Finland and Germany. The coalition was founded by Canada and the United Kingdom in 2019, and its purpose was really to promote and protect media freedom around the world, really to energize and to strengthen efforts both at the United Nations level as well as the regional human rights level. The coalition itself stands on 3 pillars. First, you have the states. Currently, there are 51 countries drawn across 6 continents. That's pillar 1. Pillar 2 is the legal panel, the panel of experts, 15 international lawyers and jurists that really act as the independent legal advisors to the states. And the third pillar is the consultative network of civil society organizations, the real subject matter experts working to defend media freedom on the front lines. All are represented here, and we really meet today at the UN Human Rights Council to consider arguably one of the greatest threats to media freedom today, the growing practice of states arbitrarily detaining journalists and publishers. I think it's fair to say that there are 2 broad facets to this. You have journalists and publishers being jailed at home for reporting inconvenient truths, for uncovering corruption, for giving voice to opposition views. But journalists are also increasingly being targeted when they report abroad. And in some cases, they're being used as bargaining chips between states, hostages in what has come to be called the practice of hostage diplomacy. Some of these cases are well known. Heard a mention of Jimmy Lai's case in Hong Kong. It's Jose Ruben Zamora, of course, currently detained in Guatemala. My client, the writer Alaa Abdel Fattah, still detained in Egypt. You will also have heard of others, some released, but only after long periods of incarceration. Evan Gershkovich, Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, Jason Rezaian. But for every named journalist or every high-profile case, there are regrettably many, many more that do not make international headlines. Today, hundreds of journalists, media workers, and publishers languish behind bars, criminalized essentially for doing their job. Each case is a grave violation of fundamental human rights. But taken together, all of these cases must be seen as a calculated assault on press freedom and a calculated assault on the dissemination of information, an assault on the public's right to know. Now, just switching momentarily to the law. The law is actually very clear. Arbitrary detention is prohibited under international law. When detention is used to pressure another state, the wrong is compounded. This is coercive by design. It undermines sovereignty. It may amount to torture, and in some circumstances, arbitrary detention may even constitute a crime against humanity. Now, arbitrary detention as an issue has been a priority area for the high-level panel's work. What we are very conscious of and what we've been working towards is ways in which the law can be strengthened, especially in its implementation and its enforcement. It's one of those areas in international law where the law simply needs sharper teeth. Now, work is underway with states in the Media Freedom Coalition to start at least a journey against a very, very difficult backdrop. And I want to start with our work with Canada, one of the co-sponsors of this event. As you will have heard from the Deputy Permanent Representative in 2021, Canada launched the Declaration Against Arbitrary Detention and State-to-State Relations. It drew on the high-level panel's recommendations to strengthen consular and diplomatic protections to journalists at risk, following consultations with certain members of the panel, including me, my predecessor, Amal Clooney, and our panel member, Professor Owen Kotler. Canada has also convened an independent group of international lawyers, as the Deputy Permanent Representative has mentioned, to examine the legal framework and to identify the gaps. And we all look forward to the official launch of the report in October. One of that group is also a member of our high-level panel. Importantly, the Canadian Declaration now has 82 state endorsements. It's an extremely important initiative which must be supported, and this is work that must be continued. But that work sits alongside the work of the high-level panel and the work of the Media Freedom Coalition's states. And we have in the last 2 or 3 years seen real practical examples of trial monitoring, prison visits, and coordinated diplomacy in individual cases. But the reason that we're all here today is the reality that much more needs to be done. And that's going to be our focus. So let me please, with that introduction, introduce our panelists. To my left, we have Susan Bazilli, member of the UN Group of Independent Experts on Human Rights in Belarus. Susan is, of course, a distinguished human rights lawyer with over 30 years of experience and expertise working on justice and accountability in challenging environments. To my right, we have Santiago Canton, Secretary General of the International Commission of Jurists, former Special Rapporteur, Freedom of Expression, the Inter-American Commission. Also, of course, a recognized authority on international law and human rights. It is my hope that we will also be joined by Antoine Bernard virtually. I can't see Antoine, but I see something is happening on my screen. So I shall take the liberty of introducing Antoine in the hope that some technical assistance can make him real. Antoine is...
I am here, I am listening to you, and it's a pleasure to be with you.
For Advocacy at Reporters Without Borders, RSF has played a key role in the Media Freedom Coalition and has been a key partner to the high-level panel. Antoine himself has long been a leading figure in international human rights law and brings decades of experience at the interface of law, advocacy, and press freedom. Antoine, we can see you. I just want to check that you can hear us.
I can hear you. I hope you can hear me. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Wonderful. And I think with those introductions, distinguished guests, I'd like to start with some questions to our panelists. We're hoping to proceed in 2 short rounds, first focusing on the diagnosis, but then importantly on the response. And Antoine, if I may, I want to start with you. I mean, this session has been called Focus on Arbitrary Detention in the Context of Media Freedom. Why is this a press freedom matter so far as you're concerned?
Well, Reporters Without Borders, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes? Okay, good. Reporters Without Borders is following on a daily basis, to date, 556 cases of arbitrarily detained journalists, in addition to 54 held hostages, stricto sensu, and 99 victims of forced disappearances. I will focus on journalists arbitrarily detained. Why is it a press freedom matter? First, I need to highlight that the phenomenon has universalized. It had turned banal. in pragmatic political terms, the cost-benefit ratio of jailing journalists has changed. It becomes even sometimes and more often politically rewarding. It's easy to vanish them with alleged legality, to instrumentalize derogations to fundamental freedoms, and in practice turn derogations into the new standards. This alleged legality is difficult to counter because it necessitates long-term sustained efforts. So, press freedom for press freedom predators, arbitrary detention is a press freedom golden neutralizer. It is effective at low cost. It's sometimes even more and more a symbol of strength and power. Why is it a press freedom matter? Because the war on information has never been so massive, manufactured by social networks that propel disinformation tsunamis, and journalists are the resisting forces to this for the sole reason of doing their job to report facts against disinformation and propaganda. Neutralizing them is erasing the social function of journalism, a pillar of democracy. It's capturing and controlling the narrative and the information space. So yes, arbitrary detention is absolutely key to protecting press freedom, journalism, and eventually citizens' rights to access trustworthy sources of information, eventually to enjoy their freedom of opinion and be able to self-determine.
Some that garner more international attention than others. But of course, another core part of what you do at RSF is monitor developments globally, including the cases that don't necessarily always get attention and providing that sort of support. We have numbers every year, that courtesy of RSF, as well as your friends at CPJ. Could you just give the room a sense of trends here? Is this a growing problem? Of course, you know, one journalist detained is a huge problem, and I don't want to turn this into a quantitative exercise, but give us a sense of the spread of this as a trend and what direction we're going in.
Yes, if you allow me, I will give some quantitative but also qualitative, sorry for the word, but also qualitative illustrations. The numbers, by numbers, arbitrary detention of journalists has been growing continuously in the past years. It has become, in the typology of rights violations against journalists, clearly number one violation, besides the situation in Gaza and the situation in Ukraine, Sudan and DRC, armed conflict contexts, in Mexico with murders, intentional murders, and summary executions. But apart from those situations, otherwise arbitrary detention is really the main trend. The top three jailers countries are China with 120, at least to date, 120 journalists arbitrarily detained, plus Hong Kong 11, including Jimmy Lai, who was referred to recently, Myanmar 55 journalists, Russia 38 journalists, including 19 Ukrainian journalists, Azerbaijan 34, Belarus, etc. I will continue afterwards, but just let me give you some examples. One just from this morning in China, journalist Zhang Zhan, she's a former lawyer. She was on trial this morning. Well, officially it was not confirmed, but this is the information we got, and not only we got it, but we succeeded in having a number of friends trying to go to the courtroom and attend the trial. We all know Zhang Zhan, because Zhang Zhan in 2019, who was in Wuhan and who first reported about COVID-19. We all know her because she is the first one who has been reporting about COVID-19 in Wuhan. And because of that reporting, she was until last year serving a 4 years jail sentence for the legal basis of picking quarrels and provoking troubles. She was happy to be released last year after serving her sentence. Unfortunately, after a few months, she was arrested again. And this morning, she was in court at risk of 5 years jail more. It's not prosecution, it's persecution. I've lost your the image, Chan, of the panel, but I have no sign I shouldn't continue, so I will continue. And I want to highlight the situation just about Belarus you just referred to, and I won't be long, but I just want to flag that indeed in our analysis, the situation of arbitrary detention of journalists in Belarus amount to the crime against humanity of persecution for the reason of practicing journalism. This has been the reason for the Reporters Without Borders communication to the International Criminal Court. A preliminary investigation opened after referral led by Lithuania, as we know, but it also qualifies in Belarus as hijacking with terrorist intent. This is the criminal lawsuit we brought to the Lithuanian Prosecutor General some years ago after the hijacking of the Ryanair plane to arrest journalist Roman Protasevich and terrorize others. The investigation is continuing. But those illustrations, this means to illustrate how deep the practice of arbitrary detention is and the very political motivation behind resorting to that practice.
Yes.
I wouldn't just conclude my answer without referring, Chan, if you allow me, to the longest detained journalist, arbitrarily detained journalist in the world. He's been detained since 18 August 2001 in Eritrea. His name is Dawit Isaak. And Dawit Isaak, we think, is still alive. And I plea really today so that we all consider his case. Lastly, I will turn to the Philippines and a very unknown case for the last 5 years, which we hope together with the Media Freedom Coalition to bring into light, which is the case of 26-year-old journalist Francie May Kumpio. She's been in a pretrial detention for the past 5 years. Now she's being tried for possession of firearms and funding terrorism, which is really a nonsense, and she has always denied. She is at risk of 40 years jail conviction. So as we see, it's not a little affair, it's not a small case. All these are very, very big, carefully built, thought of cases targeting journalists through arbitrary detention.
Thank you, Antoine. And I think you mentioned the grave situation in Belarus, which is the perfect segue, Susan, to turn to you. Perhaps you could sketch out for us the gravity of the situation on the ground.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you, everyone. The targeting of journalists remains a defining feature of the human rights crisis in Belarus. It serves as a gateway for the systemic repression of dissent, whether real or perceived, against the rule of President Lukashenko. The authorities continue to silence dissent by criminalizing the exercise of fundamental rights to freedom of expression and access to information. And as we know, journalists and media professionals are among the principal victims of this policy. In the period preceding and following the August 2020 presidential election, journalists and media workers were systematically targeted. Reporters Without Borders, in fact, have described Belarus as Europe's most dangerous country for journalists. Credible reports document arrests, arbitrary detention, excessive use of force, and ill treatment of journalists during the election period and its aftermath, including in the context of peaceful assemblies. These accounts have been consistently corroborated by both Belarusian and international civil society actors. Our group of independent experts has repeatedly reported on the arbitrary arrest and physical assault of journalists, even when clearly they've been identified with press credentials. Many have faced politically motivated prosecutions, while international and local media accreditations were revoked. Homes and offices were raided and websites have been blocked. Lawyers representing these journalists were often compelled to sign very vague non-disclosure agreements, preventing them from communicating case information, and several have faced disbarment. And in fact, many lawyers in Belarus have been disbarred and many have now gone into exile. Reports of torture and ill treatment to extract forced confessions have also been documented by our group. To date, no criminal investigations in Belarus have been initiated into any complaints lodged by victims. And we have found crimes against humanity, the crimes of political persecution and imprisonment. Successive amendments to the law on mass media have significantly expanded restrictions. These include extending licensing and content monitoring requirements to block online outlets, granting authorities broad discretion to suspend operations and block websites without any judicial oversight. The cumulative effect of systematic and systemic harassment and intimidation has created an atmosphere of fear and impunity throughout Belarus. This situation violates fundamental rights enshrined in international law, including liberty and security of the person, protection from torture and other ill treatment, physical integrity, fair trial, freedom of expression, and non-discrimination. And these rights are protected under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the ICCPR, to which Belarus became a signatory in 1973. There's been no invocation of national security, whether under sedition laws or otherwise, that can legitimately be used to justify this prosecution of journalists. And according to the latest public reports this week, journalist Ihar Eliash has been sentenced to 4 years for discrediting Belarus and aiding extremist activity. And journalist Andreas Pochabert is still imprisoned, suffering from multiple illnesses that are complicated by the prison conditions. We are also following up on the reports of the 9 journalists who were just released from prison, and we will be hoping to speak with them and plan to report on human rights violations in our next mandate report to the Council in March of next year.
Susan, I think in your answer, you probably answered the question I'm about to ask. The impact of all of this must be very, very severe on press freedom, both inside and outside of Belarus. But what is is there a press blackout effectively now in Belarus? I mean, what's the situation vis-a-vis the Belarusian people's ability to understand what's actually going on in the country or outside of the country?
First of all, it's important to state for our group, we have been denied entry into Belarus, and we have a principle of do no harm, so we do not directly interview people inside Belarus. So our information on that will be coming from civil society organizations or journalists themselves who've left the country. But it would be fair to say there is no access to any media freedom inside Belarus. In fact, on the contrary, there would be access to disinformation. Yeah.
And government propaganda, no doubt. I want to turn to Santiago. You have a deep expertise in press freedom, freedom of expression, also international law. From your vantage point, Santiago, where does arbitrary detention sit within the broader challenges to media freedom today?
Thank you. Special thanks to Canada and Belgium for putting this together. And good to see you, Bernard, although virtually, but good to see you after so many years. Let me just briefly reframe your question, if I may, with another question. What do we mean when we talk about the detention of journalists? What do we mean about sending journalists to jail, which is what we for unjust reasons, which is what we talk about when we talk about the arbitrary detention. And we are talking about an attack to democracy. And that's not Santiago Canton here saying it, that has been said by several tribunals, international tribunals, national tribunals, and different mechanisms from all over the world. When you attack, when you send to jail a journalist, you silence society. Journalists play a critical role in society. So that's why it's critical when we talk about arbitrary detention of journalists. It sounds very technical, but at the end of the day, we are talking about an attack to democracy, and I think it's important to keep that in mind. Where does it stand from my perspective? When I became Special Rapporteur on freedom of expression in 1998, so more than 25 years ago. And the main challenge in my region, mainly in Latin America, back then was the killing of journalists. That year, I think it was around 70-some journalists that had been killed. And of course, that is obvious, always the main challenge. It is still today, as Antoine was saying, I believe this year approximately, according to the Committee to Protect Journalists in New York, this year 124 journalists have been killed. Maybe Antoine has other numbers. And out of those 124, 85 were killed in the Israel-Gaza war. But that was always the main problem. Now, what will be, on my view, the second most important problem for journalists? It is arbitrary detention, but it is arbitrary detention in the broad sense. Yeah. The fact that Antoine was referring to 550 journalists detained is even more than that in the following way. Usually, the detention itself comes after a series of fabricated cases against journalists, whether it is based on fake news or whether it is based on anti-terrorism legislation. So in addition to the 550 that Antoine mentioned, there are many other journalists that spend their days defending themselves and spending money that they don't have in order to be not to go to jail. Yeah. That's the case you mentioned of Ruben Zamora, for instance. So in addition to the 550, there are probably thousands more that are right now that are somehow involved in that arbitrary detention possibility. That's why I think it's better to talk about the situation they have in a broad sense. And the effect it has over all society, not just only on journalists, the chilling effect it has, it cannot be measured by numbers. So I will always multiply all the numbers that we see in order to understand the situation better.
That's absolutely, that's an extremely good point. And, you know, when you look also at the journalists who have to leave their countries if they can, journalists in exile, all of this is because of imminent threats that they face. So regrettably, you know, those numbers of detained journalists is far too far, but it's not representative of the entirety of the problem. I want to just ask you, Santiago, by way of follow-up, to give us your thoughts on a very specific form of arbitrary detention, and that is what has come to be known as hostage diplomacy. I had some involvement in the Evan Gershkovich case. There have been other cases that are similar, and of course, this addresses centrally what Canada has been working on the state-to-state arbitrary detention in state-to-state relations. Give us your perspective on that aspect to this issue.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for that question also. First, let me thank you, Canada, for taking on this initiative. We at the ICJ believe this is a very serious concern that is happening, that is growing and needs to be addressed urgently, and that's what Canada is doing. We provided some support to the initiative from Canada by sending a questionnaire to several civil society organizations to respond specifically on this issue, which hopefully, as it was said by the representative of Canada, in October we will have the final report. Let me just add to that one thing, which is very much related to the issue of arbitrary detention and journalists when it is on a situation of hostage diplomacy. We are talking about an even worse situation than, which is very simple to understand, very worse situation than normal arbitrary detention, because the person in another country is in another country. That means that that person probably may not speak the language of that country, don't understand the law, probably cannot get a lawyer
You have a very good sense, I think, about the gravity of the situation that we're facing. I want to turn to our panelists now with a focus on the proper response to this. You've heard me talk about various efforts at the international level, at the institutional level, various reviews by experts by legal experts and so on. I want to turn back to Antoine. RSF has been a key part of the Media Freedom Coalition within the consultative network. And I think it's fair to say that RSF's focus with some of its other network partners has been on securing commitments from states within the Media Freedom Coalition. Antoine, I hope you can hear us. The question
I can.
Excellent. The question for you is, what are your three key asks in this area? And if I could ask you, Antoine, and also our panelists to be as succinct as possible on this round so that we can get through the most important part of this panel, I would be very grateful. Antoine, over to you.
Thank you, Chan. Well, first ask is to states not only to take commitments, but to operationalize them in granular, sustained commitment in following the cases of arbitrarily detained journalists. Example, this morning in the trial of Zhang Zhang that I was referring to, 8 states have ordered their embassies to send staff to try to attend the trial. This is absolutely key. It needs granularity, it needs sustainability because the cases are long and the situations are difficult. Second ask, public statements at the appropriate moments. We succeeded last year in contributing to the release of DRC journalist Stanis Bujakara, and that was, I think, thanks to activating a wide playbook, a wide toolbox, all together with MFC member states representatives locally. On our part at RSF, we investigated on alleged evidence to actually conclude that the evidence was not inculpatory but disculpatory, which was key in the trial. At the proper moment, there were some public statements by MFC member states and the MFC, and even the president of the Republic, of the Democratic Republic of Congo, was commented publicly that he felt relieved by the outcome of the release of that journalist by the tribunal. I remember him speaking on the case on the margin of the UN General Assembly while the trial was even not starting. Third ask, that MFC member states and beyond do actually support exiled journalists and media, in particular because more and more they have been resuming their journalistic work to continue reaching out to their audience back home. I'm thinking, among others, to media from Belarus and Russia. We have to take into account they don't go into exile just by choice. Most of the time it is to avoid or to escape a risk of immediate arrest and arbitrary detention. But I want to add, because we help them a lot at RSF, that it is worth it. Their audience back home is present, is even growing in the case of Belarus and Russia, and we can measure them because we provide mirrors to those media to escape censorship of their websites. And this is an absolutely fundamental fight if we want trustworthy information to still be accessible. The fourth one, which is about the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention. I hope all MFC member states, and even, of course, far beyond, will continue supporting the working group, of which we do need opinions by such very unique, independent special procedure mechanism, just to help everybody understand the nature of the arbitrary detention when it falls under one of the 5 categories. Thanks.
Antoine, thank you. Of course, I just want to reiterate a point that you made. I mean, something that I think the Media Freedom Coalition can be very proud of, and individual states within the Media Freedom Coalition can be very proud of since 2019, is its support of journalism in exile. And of course, the first step in that support is to create pathways to safety to journalists who have to flee. And we all know that those pathways are very crowded and they move very, very slowly. And the number of states now within the Media Freedom Coalition that have established on the high-level panel's recommendation emergency visa, special streams for human rights defenders and journalists. Of course, none of these are very popular politically, and it is absolutely critical that those states that have done this continue to try to persuade other states to join them.
Can I, Chen, just,
yes.
Excuse me, can I react on this just in one sentence?
Please.
It's a plea. Please, member states of the MFC and beyond, do the same, helping journalists from Gaza to evacuate and find a host country. This situation is the worst in the world today. It has been setting a tragic new standard based on an unprecedented tolerance to crimes against journalists. UN Security Council Resolution 2222, adopted unanimously in 2015, is very, very, very far away from now. We need to be back on stage, that states are back on stage, and providing visa, safe routes, and evacuations is one of the key urgencies for journalists in Gaza. The other one being to open Gaza to international media, and the third one being to actually protect journalists in Gaza and serve justice for the unprecedented number of journalists who have been killed in Gaza, including more than 210, including 56, minimum 56, intentionally targeted. I couldn't conclude without a reference to that situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Antoine. Santiago, want to turn to you. I mean, you referred to your support through the International Commission of Jurists to the Independent International Panel on Arbitrary Detention. But give us a sense not only of that work, but also what you think as a leading international lawyer are the key remedies in this area. What are the legal levers that you think would most improve protection in practice?
Talking before this panel, and I mentioned that one of the main problems we have right now on the work on human rights all over the world is the attacks on human rights and the principles and values that we have defended since 1948. So everything has to be put in that context, I believe. But in that respect, I would say that in order to have a strong defense on all the situations we are talking about, whether it's hostage diplomacy or whether it's arbitrary detention of journalists, is you should try to get the strongest mechanism possible. And what are the criteria for the strongest mechanism possible? Has to be multilateral, so it's the full international community behind it, number one. It has to have an enforcement mechanism independent. That is critical. If it is not independent, if the persons in the mechanism represented states, by definition, this is not a criticism, by definition is not independent. And third, it has to be binding. Those are the three ones that you have no guarantee of success at all. On the contrary, unfortunately, lately, the situation is getting more and more countries are defying international decisions. But those are the three most important characteristics any functioning mechanism must have. Thanks.
Conscious we have two deputy permanent representatives on the panel. We're really looking forward to the report. I may already have seen it, and I know that both civil society but also legal experts will continue to support these sorts of state efforts. Susan, I want to turn back to you and really ask you two questions, if I may. Because we talked about, or in fact, Santiago just mentioned about sort of some places where there is limited recourse to a mechanism. How do you deal with a jurisdiction like Belarus, where there very much is limited recourse to a regional human rights mechanism, not a member of the Council of Europe, famously? And then if you would take a step back and give us your thoughts on what more states must do to end impunity for arbitrary detention more generally outside of Belarus.
So the mandate of our group is on accountability, and at 3:45, hopefully, we're releasing our latest report on accountability in Belarus to the Council. It was released on our website last week, but we're presenting it to the Council in 45 minutes, which is the result of several years of investigation and consultation with victims and civil society members. So we believe that as long as the system of corruption and clientelism, which protects Alexander Lukashenko's repressive presidency, is in place in Belarus, there's no prospect for accountability inside the country for the thousands of Belarusians who require it. So I guess in a nutshell, the rampant violations committed within Belarus by the government of Belarus have left people looking for an internationalized response to their plight because there are no domestic avenues in the national courts. There's no mechanism in the country. So countries around the world are responding in a range of ways. Anton referred to the state referral to the International Criminal Court by Lithuania. We've been working with the Lithuanian government on this response. Secondly, attempts to open domestic investigations through the principle of universal jurisdiction, which we urge member states to pursue, if at all possible, via diplomatic channels. There are some of those going on. And through the issuance of targeted sanctions against individuals and entities for gross human rights violations in Belarus. Obviously, at some point, these will have to be augmented by national prosecutions inside Belarus, but we know that a very limited number of cases can be dealt with by other states, by the international community, and so we have this significant impunity gap. Assistance by the international community to strengthen the capacity, independence, impartiality, and effectiveness of the Belarus national justice system with respect to prosecuting these crimes should form the part of any transition. And our report, which looks at accountability mechanisms, is not only looking at criminal, but also looking at reparations, truth-seeking, and so on. So there's a number of recommendations that we are making to the international community based on what we've been told by Belarusians themselves. We are trying to be their voice in this fora.
Thank you very much. Conscious of the time, I'd like, on behalf of the panel, to make 3 points in closing, and these 3 points are very much directed to the state representatives in the room. I think we can all agree that arbitrary detention is unlawful, full stop, whether it is arbitrary detention of journalists, dissidents, human rights defenders, and there must be zero tolerance of it. In the context of our discussion today, it's obviously an attack on media freedom, but of course it also serves to corrode the rule of law and the international order on which it is based. I think the third point, and hopefully not a controversial one, is that this issue can only be meaningfully addressed if states act, and then if states act together. Through safeguards, through accountability, through collective diplomacy, and through, I hope, giving international law in this context some teeth. I'd like to thank our panelists, and I'd like to invite the Deputy Permanent Representative of Belgium to the United Nations to provide some closing remarks.
Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, dear panelists, as we conclude today's powerful and urgent discussion, allow me to express Belgium's deep appreciation to the organizer, the International Bar Association Human Rights Institute, and the high-level panel on legal expert on media freedom for convening this timely side event. And I've been told it's the first one on that topic in Geneva, so I think that it was high time. The testimonies and insights that were shared today have reinforced a sobering truth. The arbitrary detention of journalists is not only a violation of individual rights, it's an assault on the very foundations of free democratic societies, like we were remembered by Santiago Canton. When journalists are silenced, truth is suppressed and accountability is eroded. And we've heard how the trend is increasing, becoming banalized, and an easy symbol of strength and power, like mentioned by RSF. Belgium stands firmly against such practices that also impact Belgian journalists abroad. Our foreign policy places press freedom as its core. We actively support initiatives like the Journalists Matter campaign, and we are proud to be part of the Media Freedom Coalition, which works to protect journalists worldwide. We believe that censorship, intimidation, and arbitrary detention must be met with coordinated international answers. And we continue to advocate for strong consular support, as well as accountability mechanism, including for the situation in Belarus. In this regard, the work of the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention is indispensable. Its rigorous investigations and principled opinion provide a vital legal framework to challenge unlawful detentions and to uphold international human rights standards. Belgium values and supports the group's efforts and encourages all states to cooperate fully with its mandates. Colleagues, let us leave this room with renewed determination. The release of arbitrarily detained journalists must be a shared priority. We've taken good note of your conclusion, Chan. States must work on sharpening policies and tools we have at our disposal, because journalist freedom is our collective responsibility, and the courage must inspire our continued action. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, we can adjourn the session. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.